Standing in the dusty main street, Elizabeth felt the crushing weight of public humiliation as her father sold her like damaged goods, her barren womb making her worthless in the eyes of her own blood. The piercing gaze of the Apache trader who counted out $8 revealed something that stole her breath, not ownership, but recognition of a strength her family had been too blind to see. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The scorching Nebraska sun beat down upon the dusty main street of Willow Creek, a small frontier settlement clinging to the edge of civilization like a stubborn burr to a horseman's trouser. The summer of 1876 had been merciless, the drought stretching across the plains with cruel persistence, turning hopeful fields into seas of brittle yellow stalks that crumbled at the slightest touch. The air itself seemed parched, each breath drawing dust deeper into already dry lungs. Elizabeth Harmon stood with her head bowed, her thin cotton dress hanging limply from shoulders that once carried themselves with quiet dignity. Her auburn hair, once her pride, now hung in a simple, severe braid down her back, the sun having leached much of its luster during long hours of work in her parents' struggling farm. At 22, her face already showed lines of worry around eyes that had shed too many private tears. $5 in the sack of grain, her father's voice rang out, harsh and unyielding. A fair trade for a woman who can work. Won't give you no children, mind, but she's strong enough for field work. The words cut through Elizabeth like a blade, though she had known they were coming. Her hands, calloused and rough, twisted together before her, knuckles white with tension. She didn't raise her eyes to see the faces of the townspeople who had stopped to witness her shame. She knew their expressions all too well. Pity mingled with righteous judgment, the women clutching their own children closer as if barrenness might be catching. "John Harmon, have you no shame?" Reverend Miller's voice cut through the murmurs of the small crowd. "Selling your own daughter like cattle. What else am I to do with her?" John Harmon spat, his weather-beaten face flushed with anger or perhaps shame. Thomas Keller returned her like damaged goods after 3 years of fruitless marriage. "My fields are dying. My wife and I can barely feed ourselves." Elizabeth's mother stood a few paces back, arms crossed tightly across her chest, lips pressed into a thin line. Her silence was its own form of betrayal, cutting deeper than her father's cruel words. Not once had she spoken in her daughter's defense. "She's worthless to us now," her father continued, gesturing broadly to the men gathered around, mostly traders passing through on their way to more promising territories. "Who among you will take her?" The silence that followed was heavy with discomfort. Elizabeth closed her eyes, wishing the earth would open and swallow her whole. From the edge of the gathering, dark eyes watched with growing intensity. Nakohe had not intended to stop long in this white settlement. His pack mules carried goods to trade, finely tanned hides, intricately woven baskets, and herbs that couldn't be found in these parts. As a widowed Apache trader, he walked a precarious line between worlds, tolerated for his goods, but never truly welcome. He had 5 children waiting at his camp outside town, 5 mouths that had gone too long without a mother's care since his beloved wife had passed 2 winters ago during a bout of fever that swept through their small band. His oldest, a girl of 12, had shouldered too much responsibility for one so young. The youngest, barely 4, barely remembered his mother's face. Nakohe studied the woman being offered like a sack of flour. Where others saw shame, he recognized dignity in the straight line of her back, despite the bowed head. Where they saw worthlessness, he noted capable hands and strong arms. But most of all, he saw kindness in the way she had earlier helped an elderly woman with a fallen basket, despite her own obvious distress. "I'll take her," he said, his deep voice silencing the murmurs instantly. All eyes turned to him, expressions ranging from shock to disgust. An Indian trader taking a white woman? Elizabeth's head snapped up, and for the first time, their eyes met across the dusty street. Hers were wide with surprise and perhaps fear, blue as the summer sky that had withheld its rain. His were dark and steady, offering neither pity nor judgment, just calm assessment. "You?" John Harmon's laugh was ugly. "What would an Indian want with a barren woman?" Nakohe stepped forward, his movements fluid and deliberate. Unlike many of the settlers, his frame showed no evidence of hunger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair tied back with a leather cord, his clothing a practical blend of traditional and settler garments. "I have 5 children who need a mother," he said simply. "They need care, not more brothers and sisters." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth's eyes widened further. "The price?" Nakohe asked, his voice betraying no emotion. John Harmon hesitated, thrown off balance by the unexpected offer. $10 and 2 of those fine pelts," he countered, greed suddenly sharpening his features. Nakohe reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out several coins and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. $8, he said. "And this." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a carved medicine box inlaid with turquoise, a valuable piece that caused several onlookers to murmur appreciatively. John Harmon's eyes gleamed. He snatched the offering before Nakohe could reconsider. "Take her then," he said, pushing Elizabeth forward roughly. "She's yours now." Elizabeth stumbled slightly, catching herself before she fell. Her face burned with humiliation, but beneath it stirred something else, a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a storm. Elizabeth walked alongside Nakohe in silence, one small cloth bundle containing her meager possessions clutched against her chest like a shield. They moved through Willow Creek's main street, past the general store where she'd once traded eggs for sugar, past the church where Reverend Miller now stood watching with a troubled expression, past the faces that had witnessed her humiliation and would gossip about it for months to come. Not once did she look back toward her parents. The final image of her mother's averted gaze and her father's hand closing around Nakohe's payment was seared into her memory, a wound too fresh to examine. "I have mules and supplies at the edge of town," Nakohe said, his English accented but clear. "We will travel until sunset." Elizabeth nodded, not trusting her voice. Her mind whirled with questions and fears. What kind of man had purchased her? What awaited her at his camp? The stories told about Indians around evening fires were rarely kind, filled with savagery and heathen practices, yet the man beside her walked with a calm assurance that did not match those tales. When they reached the edge of town, 3 laden mules stood patiently in the shade of a cottonwood. Nakohe checked their loads efficiently, then turned to Elizabeth. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, finding her voice at last. Her father had taught her as a child, one of the few gifts he'd given her. "But not well." "Then you will ride the gentlest one," he said, adjusting the blanket on a dun-colored mule. "She is called Whisper because she makes no sound, even on rocky paths." His consideration surprised her. Elizabeth had expected to walk, or worse. She approached the animal cautiously, and Whisper regarded her with large, liquid eyes that held no judgment. "She likes you," Nakohe observed, the faintest smile touching his lips. He cupped his hands to help her mount, and Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before placing her foot in them, her hand bracing against his shoulder as she swung awkwardly onto the mule's back. His shoulder felt solid beneath her touch, warm through the fabric of his shirt. It had been so long since she'd touched a man, not since Thomas had declared her worthless and sent her back to her parents in disgrace. They traveled west, leaving the settlement behind. The landscape opened around them, rolling plains stretching toward distant bluffs, the earth cracked and thirsty under a relentless sky. Elizabeth's thoughts turned inward as they rode, examining her situation with growing bewilderment. "You said you have 5 children," she ventured finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Yes. Nakohe nodded, glancing back at her. My oldest daughter is 12. Her name is Ayana. Then the twin boys, Elan and Takoda, 8 winters old. My second daughter, Kimi, is 6. The youngest, Hurit, is 4. The names were unfamiliar on her tongue when she repeated them silently, trying to commit them to memory. 5 children, 5 souls who had lost their mother. What happened to their mother? Elizabeth asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. Fever, Nakohe replied, his voice level but with an undercurrent of old pain. 2 winters passed. Many in our band fell ill. She was strong, but the sickness was stronger. Elizabeth nodded, understanding loss all too well. I'm sorry. As am I, he said simply. They rode in silence for another mile before he spoke again. My children need a mother, not for bearing more, but for loving those already here. The directness of his statement startled her. I don't know if I can be what they need. I failed as a wife. I couldn't give my husband children. Nakohe turned in his saddle to look at her fully, his dark eyes intense. The Great Spirit gives life where and when he chooses. No woman should be blamed for his decisions. The words washed over Elizabeth like cool water, so different from the condemnation she had grown accustomed to. She didn't know whether to believe him, but the absence of judgment in his gaze was a balm to her raw spirit. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Elizabeth noticed smoke rising in the distance. Nakohe pointed toward it. Our camp. We will be there soon. Elizabeth's heart quickened with apprehension. 5 children waited there, children who had lost a mother, children who were not her own, children who might look at her with suspicion or resentment. What place could she possibly find among them? They will be curious about you, Nakohe said, as if reading her thoughts. But they are good children. They will give you time. Time. Elizabeth nearly laughed. Time was all she had now, stretching before her like the vast prairie, unknown and unpredictable. She had been sold to this man, this stranger from another world. Yet oddly, for the first time in 3 years, she felt the faintest stirring of something she'd thought long dead, hope. The Apache camp appeared before them as the day's last light painted the horizon in strokes of crimson and gold. It was smaller than Elizabeth had imagined. Just 3 hide-covered structures nestled in a natural hollow near a small creek lined with cottonwoods. A woman with silver-streaked hair tended a cooking fire while children's voices carried on the evening air. As they approached, the children's play halted. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion. Elizabeth felt herself being assessed and measured in ways that made her heart flutter with anxiety. Nakohe dismounted smoothly and helped Elizabeth down from her mule. Her legs trembled, both from the unaccustomed ride and from nerves. Children, Nakohe said, his voice gentle but firm, this is Elizabeth. She has come to stay with us. The oldest girl, Ayana, stepped forward. She wore a simple dress of soft buckskin, her long black hair falling in twin braids. Though only 12, she carried herself with the dignity of one who had shouldered adult responsibilities. Her dark eyes, so like her father's, studied Elizabeth with undisguised wariness. Why has she come? Ayana asked, addressing her father but keeping her gaze fixed on Elizabeth. Before Nakohe could answer, the youngest boy broke away from the group, running to his father with arms outstretched. Father, did you bring honey? He asked, his attention momentarily diverted from the strange woman. Nakohe smiled, lifting the child into his arms. Yes, Hurit, and something more important. He turned to include Elizabeth in his gesture, someone to care for you when I am trading. We don't need anyone, Ayana declared, her chin lifting slightly. I take care of everyone fine. You do, Nakohe agreed solemnly. but you are still a child, and you should have time to be one." The twin boys, identical with matching expressions of cautious interest, edged closer. "Is she our new mother?" one asked. Ilan or Takoda, Elizabeth couldn't yet tell. "She is Elizabeth," Nakohe replied simply, "and she will help care for you." The older woman approached, her face deeply lined, but her steps still firm. "Welcome," she said to Elizabeth, her accent thicker than Nakohe's. "I am Liluye, mother of Nakohe's wife who walks with the ancestors now." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for the simple courtesy. "Thank you," she murmured. "Come," Liluye said. "You must be hungry. We have rabbit stew." The camp settled into evening routines, though Elizabeth felt the children's eyes on her constantly. The youngest girl, Kimmy, hovered at the edge of Elizabeth's vision, clearly curious but unwilling to approach. Only little Hurit seemed untroubled by her presence, babbling happily about a lizard he had caught that morning. After the meal, Nakohe showed Elizabeth to a small hide-covered structure. "You will sleep here," he said. "My mother-in-law prepared it for you." Elizabeth stepped inside, surprised to find a clean bedroll and a small chest for her belongings. "Thank you," she said, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "This is, kind." Something in her voice made Nakohe pause. "You expected cruelty?" Elizabeth looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I didn't know what to expect." "We are not savages, despite what your people believe," he said, his voice quiet, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth whispered. "It's just everything I have ever known is gone," he finished for her. "Yes, but something new begins." He hesitated, then added, "Rest now. Tomorrow will be difficult enough." Left alone, Elizabeth finally allowed her composure to crack. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks as she unpacked her few possessions: a comb, a small hand mirror her mother had given her years ago, a worn Bible, and a single dress besides the one she wore. Her entire life reduced to a pitiful bundle. Outside, she heard the children's voices as Nakohe settled them for the night. She caught fragments of their conversation, spoken in their native tongue, but with tones that needed no translation. Questions, reassurances, a child's laugh, a soft song, a family broken but still whole in ways her own had never been. Elizabeth wiped her tears, composed herself, and stepped back outside. She found Ayana at the creek's edge, angrily scrubbing cooking vessels. "May I help?" Elizabeth asked softly. The girl's hands stilled. "I don't need help," she said, not looking up. Elizabeth nodded. "I understand, but sometimes it's nice not to be alone with a task." Ayana glanced up then, suspicion still evident in her eyes, but something else too, a flicker of wary assessment, as if weighing Elizabeth's worth more carefully. "Fine," she said finally, sliding a wooden bowl toward Elizabeth. "You can dry." Dawn broke over the camp with the soft cooing of morning doves and the gurgle of the creek. Elizabeth woke, disoriented, the unfamiliar sounds and smells momentarily confusing her. The events of the previous day crashed back into her consciousness: her father's cruel bargain, the journey with Nakohe, the wary eyes of his children. She smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could and pinned her hair into a simple knot, using the small mirror to ensure she looked presentable. As if appearances mattered here, she thought ruefully. But old habits were hard to break. Outside, the camp was already alive with activity. Liluye knelt by the morning fire, her gnarled hands deftly shaping corn dough into small cakes that she placed on a flat stone near the flames. The twins chased each other around the perimeter, their laughter punctuated by mock war cries. Kimmy sat nearby, grinding something in a small mortar with intense concentration. Ayana emerged from the family's dwelling. Hewitt trailing behind her like a shadow. She spotted Elizabeth, and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly before she turned away, barking instructions to the little boy in their native tongue. "Good morning," Elizabeth ventured, approaching Lilui by the fire. The older woman looked up, the deep lines around her eyes crinkling further. "You slept well?" she asked. "Yes, thank you," Elizabeth lied, not wanting to admit how long she had lain awake, listening to unfamiliar night sounds and wondering what her future held. Liluia gestured to a stone near the fire. "Sit, eat." Elizabeth accepted a corn cake, still warm from the cooking stone. It was plain but satisfying, with a smoky flavor unlike anything she'd tasted before. As she ate, she noticed Nakohe emerging from the largest dwelling, buckling a knife to his belt. "I must check my traps," he announced, his eyes meeting Elizabeth's briefly. "There are hides to be scraped and stretched today. Ayana will show you." Elizabeth nodded, swallowing a flash of panic as she realized he was leaving. Though she hardly knew him, Nakohe was her only connection to the familiar world she'd left behind. "When will you return?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "By midday," he replied, then turned to address the children in their language. The twins immediately stopped their play, approaching their father for what appeared to be brief instructions. Kimi abandoned her grinding to wrap her arms around his legs in a quick hug. Only Ayana remained aloof, responding to her father with short phrases that Elizabeth couldn't understand, but whose tone suggested reluctance. After Nakohe departed, Ayana approached Elizabeth, her posture rigid. "Come," she said flatly, "I will show you what must be done." Behind the main dwelling, several animal hides were staked to the ground, partially scraped. The smell was pungent, a mixture of animal musk and something astringent that made Elizabeth's eyes water. "We use brains to tan the hides," Ayana explained, noticing Elizabeth's expression. "My mother was the best tanner in our band. Her hides were soft as cloud breath." The pride in the girl's voice was unmistakable, as was the unspoken challenge. No white woman could possibly match such skill. "My mother taught me to preserve and cure meats," Elizabeth offered, "and my grandmother showed me how to make soap from lye and fat." Ayana's expression didn't change, but she handed Elizabeth a scraping tool, a piece of deer antler shaped to a dull edge. "We'll see if your hands are good for something besides white woman's work." The labor was backbreaking. Elizabeth's palms blistered within the first hour as she scraped remnants of flesh and fat from a deerskin. The sun climbed higher, beating down on her neck and shoulders until sweat soaked through her dress, plastering it uncomfortably to her back. She didn't complain, working steadily alongside Ayana, who moved with the efficiency of long practice. Mid-morning, Kimi approached with a water skin, offering it silently to Elizabeth. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, and Elizabeth smiled warmly at the child. "Thank you, Kimi." The little girl didn't smile back, but neither did she run away. She watched with open curiosity as Elizabeth drank. "Your hair is the color of autumn leaves," Kimi said suddenly, reaching out as if to touch it before pulling her hand back shyly. "Would you like to touch it?" Elizabeth offered, bending slightly. Kimi glanced at Ayana, who was studiously ignoring the exchange, then tentatively reached out to stroke a strand of Elizabeth's auburn hair that had escaped its knot. "Soft," the child pronounced solemnly before darting away. Elizabeth straightened, a small warmth blooming in her chest at the brief connection. She turned back to her work with renewed determination, even as her muscles protested the unfamiliar activity. Near midday, as Lilui was preparing a meal of dried meat and wild onions, the twins returned from wherever they had been, carrying several rabbits strung on a stick. They dropped their catch by the fire, then stared openly at Elizabeth, whispering to each other behind their hands. "Boys," Lilui scolded gently, "where are your manners? We were just wondering if she knows how to skin rabbits." one said. Takoda, Elizabeth thought, noting the small scar near his eyebrow that distinguished him from his brother. I do, Elizabeth replied, setting aside the scraping tool with relief. Her hands were raw and trembling from the morning's work. My father taught me when I was about your age. The boys exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. Show us then, Ellen challenged. Elizabeth rolled up her sleeves, accepting the first rabbit and the sharp knife Liluye handed her. She worked carefully but efficiently, making the initial cuts with precision, then peeling the skin away in one nearly intact piece. She had done this countless times on her parents' farm, though it had been years since she'd needed the skill. The twins watched, their skepticism giving way to reluctant admiration. When she finished the first rabbit and reached for the second, Elan stepped forward. I can do that one, he said, his tone somewhere between competitive and eager to show his own skill. By the time Nakohe returned, the rabbits were skinned and spitted over the fire, filling the camp with a rich aroma. Elizabeth sat with Hurit, showing him how to weave a simple grass whistle, a trick her grandfather had taught her long ago. Nakohe paused at the edge of the camp, observing the scene with unreadable eyes. Elizabeth, her dress stained with blood and dirt, her face flushed from the sun, her hair falling loose around her face, looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, neither moved, an unspoken assessment passing between them. Then Hurit blew his newly made whistle, the shrill sound breaking the spell, and Nakohe continued into camp, a string of fish hanging from his belt. You've been busy, he remarked, noting the stretched hides and cooking rabbits. Your children have been teaching me, Elizabeth replied. What she didn't say was how much the simple, hard tasks had occupied her mind, leaving no room for dwelling on all she had lost. For the first time in months, she'd been too busy to feel sorry for herself. Ayana approached, wiping her hands on a scrap of hide. She didn't do badly, she admitted grudgingly, for a white woman. Coming from Ayana, Elizabeth suspected this was high praise indeed. Days melted into one another like colors in the setting sun. Elizabeth's hands hardened, developing calluses where blisters had been. Her face and arms darkened under the Nebraska sky, and her movements became more assured as she learned the rhythms of camp life. The work was constant, but not joyless. There was satisfaction in tasks completed well, in the gradual shift from outsider to participant. The children's wariness softened by degrees. Hurit had accepted her most readily, often seeking her out with treasures to share. A perfectly round stone, a beetle with iridescent wings, a feather dropped by a passing hawk. The twins remained competitive, turning every interaction into a challenge, but their hostility had faded to something more like the normal testing of boundaries that boys their age practiced with any adult. Kimmy's shyness gradually gave way to curiosity. She would sit beside Elizabeth in the evenings, watching intently as Elizabeth mended clothes with neat, even stitches learned from years of necessity. Sometimes she would ask questions, halting at first, then with growing confidence as Elizabeth always answered patiently. Only Ayana maintained her distance, civil but cool, as if reserving final judgment until some unspecified future date. One morning, a week after her arrival, Elizabeth woke to find the camp unusually quiet. Nakosh and the twins had left before dawn to hunt, and Liluya had taken Kimmy and Hurit to gather medicinal plants further up the creek. Only Ayana remained, working on a beaded moccasin with intense concentration. Elizabeth built up the morning fire and began preparing cornmeal for the day's bread. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but no longer bristling with the girl's initial hostility. "Those are beautiful," Elizabeth commented, nodding toward the moccasins. The beadwork created an intricate pattern of blue and yellow against the soft tan leather. Ayana's hands stilled. "My mother taught me," she said after a moment, before she walked to the spirit world. Elizabeth recognized the offering in those words, a small opening in the wall Ayana had built. "You honor her with your skill," she said softly. "She made the best moccasins," Ayana continued, her voice taking on a wistful quality Elizabeth hadn't heard before. Her fingers moved like water over stone, smooth and sure. She looked up, meeting Elizabeth's eyes directly. She sang while she worked, always. "What did she sing?" Elizabeth asked. Ayana looked away. "Songs of our people, songs I'm forgetting." The admission seemed torn from her, painful in its honesty. Elizabeth's heart ached for the girl, not yet a woman, but forced to shoulder a woman's burdens, including the preservation of her mother's memory for the younger children. "Perhaps you could teach me one?" Elizabeth suggested gently. "Then we could sing it together, and it would be harder to forget." Suspicion flashed across Ayana's face. "Why would you want to learn our songs? You have your own." "Because they matter to you," Elizabeth replied simply, "and because beautiful things shouldn't be lost." Something shifted in Ayana's expression, not quite acceptance but a reassessment, as if she were seeing Elizabeth through different eyes. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the quiet. Elizabeth looked up, expecting to see Nakohe returning early. Instead, 3 white men rode into the clearing, their expressions hardening when they spotted Elizabeth. "Well, look what we have here," the leader said, a tall man with a rust-colored beard and cold eyes. "Heard rumors in town about Harmon selling his daughter to an Indian, but didn't believe it till now." Elizabeth rose slowly, acutely aware of Ayana standing tensely beside her. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Nakohe isn't here at present." "Didn't come to see the Injun," the man replied. "Came to rescue a white woman who's been stolen." "I wasn't stolen," Elizabeth corrected firmly, "and I don't need rescuing." The man dismounted, his companions following suit. All 3 wore gun belts, their hands resting too casually near their weapons. "Don't know what kind of spell they've put on you," the bearded man said, stepping closer, "but no decent white woman chooses to live with savages. We're taking you back to civilization." Elizabeth stood her ground. "This is my home now. Please leave." The man's face darkened. "Listen here, woman. We're doing you a favor. Whatever shame you're hiding from, it can't be worth this." He gestured contemptuously at the camp. "I said leave," Elizabeth repeated, her heart pounding but her voice firm. The second man, shorter but with a mean look in his pale eyes, spat on the ground. "She's gone native," Clyde, "probably warming that Apache's bed at night." Hot shame flooded Elizabeth's cheeks, but before she could respond, Ayana stepped forward, a skinning knife clutched in her hand. "You go now," the girl said, her English deliberate but clear, "or my father and brothers will take your scalps when they return." The men laughed, but there was uneasiness beneath their mockery. "Look at the little savage making threats," the bearded man, Clyde, said. "Put that pig sticker down before you hurt yourself, girl." Elizabeth moved protectively in front of Ayana. "I won't ask again. This is Apache land by treaty. You're trespassing." "Treaties with Indians ain't worth the paper they're written on," Clyde growled, taking another step forward. "Now, you're coming with us one way or another." The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Elizabeth measured the distance to the dwelling where she knew Nakohe kept a rifle, calculating whether she could reach it before the men could grab her. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the trees. "I wouldn't take another step if I were you, Clyde Wilson." All heads turned to see Nakohe emerging from the woods, rifle raised and aimed squarely at Clyde's chest. Behind him, the twins stood with bows drawn, their young faces uncharacteristically grave. Clyde's hand hovered over his pistol. 3 men against an Indian and 2 boys. Those aren't odds I'd worry about. "Perhaps you should count again," came another voice, deeper and authoritative. From the opposite side of the clearing, 4 more Apache warriors materialized, as if conjured from the very air. Each held a weapon at the ready, 2 with rifles, 2 with bows. Elizabeth felt a rush of relief so powerful, her knees nearly buckled. She hadn't realized until that moment how truly frightened she had been. "This doesn't concern you, Injuns," Clyde blustered, though he had gone pale beneath his beard. "We're just retrieving stolen property." "I am not property," Elizabeth said, her voice steadier now. "I wasn't stolen, and I'm not leaving. Not today, not ever." Nakohe approached slowly, his rifle never wavering. "You heard the woman. Now mount your horses and ride away while you still can." For a tense moment, Elizabeth thought Clyde might draw his gun despite the odds. But the third man, who had remained silent until now, grabbed his companion's arm. "Let's go, Clyde," he muttered. "Ain't worth dying over some farmer's cast-off daughter." The words stung, but Elizabeth held her head high, meeting Clyde's angry gaze without flinching. Finally, the men mounted their horses. "This isn't over," Clyde warned, pointing a finger at Nakohe. "There's more of us than you." "And yet," Nakohe replied coolly, "you are the ones leaving." Only when the sounds of the departing horses faded did Elizabeth allow herself to tremble. She turned to find Ayana still beside her, the knife now lowered but her eyes burning with fierce pride. "You stayed," the girl said, a note of wonder in her voice. "You could have gone with them, back to your people, but you stayed." Elizabeth looked from Ayana to Nakohe, who was speaking quietly with the other warriors. "Your people are my people now," she said softly, and was surprised to realize she meant it. After the confrontation with Clyde Wilson and his companions, something fundamental shifted in the camp. The warriors who had come to their aid stayed for the evening meal, and Elizabeth found herself the subject of curious but not unkind glances as she helped Liluya prepare food. She caught fragments of conversation in the Apache language, hearing her name mentioned several times, followed once by soft laughter that didn't seem mocking. When the meal was done, the men gathered in a circle with Nakohe, speaking in low voices. Elizabeth sat with the children, helping Kimi untangle a piece of thread she was using to string beads while Hurit dozed against her side. The twins listened avidly to the men's conversation, clearly understanding more than they were meant to. "What are they saying?" Elizabeth whispered to Elan. The boy glanced at his father, then back to Elizabeth. "They speak of trouble coming," he said softly. "The white men push closer to our hunting grounds each season. More settlers arrive with each moon." Elizabeth nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. The confrontation today had been a harbinger of tensions that would only grow. She thought of Willow Creek, of the whispers and stares that had followed her there. What would those same people think of her now, living openly among the Apache, defending them against her own kind? Later, after the visiting warriors had departed and the children were asleep, Elizabeth found herself alone with Nakohe by the dying fire. He sat cross-legged, working a piece of wood with his knife, carving what appeared to be a small animal figure. His hands moved with precision, each cut deliberate and sure. "Thank you," Elizabeth said quietly, "for what you did today." Nakohe looked up, the firelight casting his features in amber and shadow. "I protect what is mine," he said simply. The words sent an unexpected warmth through Elizabeth's chest. She belonged somewhere again, was claimed by someone who valued her enough to defend her. "Your words to Ayana," he continued, returning to his carving, "about her people being your people now. Did you mean them?" Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "Yes," she answered finally, "I did. I have no place in the white world anymore. They discarded me, sold me, would force me to return only to use me poorly." She met his eyes across the flames. "Here, at least, I have purpose. The children need me." "And is that enough?" Nakohe asked, his voice neutral. "For now," she replied honestly. "It is more than I had before." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the scrape of his knife against wood and the soft crackle of embers. "What are you making?" Elizabeth asked eventually. Nakohe held up the carving, a small fox taking shape from the pale wood. "For Hurit," he explained, "he has nightmares. A fox spirit will guard his dreams." Elizabeth smiled, touched by the gesture. "You're a good father." Nakohe's expression softened marginally. "I try to be mother and father both. It is not always possible." "That's why I'm here," Elizabeth said softly. "Yes." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary before returning to his work. "That is why you are here." The next morning, Elizabeth woke early to find Ayana already up, rekindling the fire. The girl looked up as Elizabeth approached, her expression thoughtful. "I will teach you a song today," she said without preamble. "One my mother sang while gathering roots." Elizabeth smiled, careful not to show too much excitement lest Ayana withdraw the offer. "I would be honored to learn it." For the next hour, as the camp slowly came to life around them, Ayana taught Elizabeth a simple melody with words that felt foreign on her tongue. The song spoke of the earth giving its gifts, of thanks to the spirits of plants that offered themselves for food and medicine. Elizabeth stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, but Ayana showed uncharacteristic patience, correcting her pronunciation with a seriousness that bordered on solemnity. When Elizabeth finally managed to sing the entire verse correctly, Ayana's face broke into a brief but genuine smile, the first Elizabeth had seen directed at her. "Not bad," the girl conceded, "for a white woman." It was becoming something of a refrain, that phrase, but now it held a hint of affection rather than disdain. Later that day, as summer heat shimmered above the plains, Nakohe announced that they would move camp. "We go to join the rest of our band," he explained. "It is safer now to be with others." Elizabeth helped pack their belongings efficiently, having learned the proper way to dismantle and bundle the hide coverings of their dwellings. As she worked, she realized with some surprise that she felt no regret about leaving. This small camp by the creek had been a transitional space, neither fully of her old world nor completely of her new one. Moving deeper into Apache territory felt right, a step further along the path she had begun when she mounted Whisper that first day. They traveled for 2 days, making camp each night in locations Nakohe seemed to know well. Elizabeth rode, Whisper, with Hurit perched before her, his small body warm against hers as he pointed out hawks circling overhead or rabbits darting through the grass. On the afternoon of the second day, they crested a gentle rise to see a larger encampment spread below them in a broad valley where 2 streams converged. Perhaps 20 dwellings formed a rough circle, with horses grazing in a natural corral formed by a bend in the larger stream. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and figures moved about in the ordinary business of living. Nakohe raised a hand in greeting, and a call went up from the camp. Several mounted men rode out to meet them, exchanging words with Nakohe in their language. Elizabeth felt their curious gazes sweep over her, but there was none of the hostility she had feared. As they rode into the camp, people emerged from dwellings or paused in their tasks to watch them pass. Elizabeth sat straight on Whisper, conscious of the assessment taking place, but determined not to show fear or uncertainty. Hurit, sensing her tension, patted her hand reassuringly. "It's all right," he said in his piping voice. "They will like you." They stopped near the center of the camp, where an elderly man waited, his face deeply lined, his hair completely white, but his posture still proud and erect. Nakohe dismounted and approached him with respect, speaking rapidly. The old man listened, his dark eyes occasionally flicking to Elizabeth, then responded with a nod. Nakohe turned and helped Elizabeth and Hurit down from Whisper. "This is Kitchi," he said. "He is our band's chief and my father's brother." I have told him who you are and why you are with us." Elizabeth inclined her head respectfully. "I'm honored to meet you," she said. To her surprise, the old man responded in heavily accented but understandable English. "Welcome, Elizabeth of the auburn hair. My nephew has chosen boldly, bringing a white woman to be mother to his children. We will see if his choice was also wise." "I hope to prove that it was," Elizabeth replied steadily. Kitchi studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "Your spirit has strength," he pronounced. "You will need it." With that cryptic statement, he turned to greet Lily and the children, effectively dismissing Elizabeth. She stepped back, watching as Ayana approached her great-uncle with obvious reverence, the twins bouncing with barely contained excitement at her side. A woman about Elizabeth's age approached, her round face open and friendly. "I am Orenda," she said, her English clear though accented. "My husband is Nakohe's cousin. I will help you settle." Elizabeth smiled gratefully, relieved to find a potential friend in this new place. "Thank you. I appreciate any guidance you can offer." Orenda led her to a space at the edge of the encampment where Nakohe's sons were already unloading their belongings. "You will raise your dwelling here," she explained. "Near my family." She hesitated, then added, "Some will be curious about you. Others may not welcome you at first, but most will accept Nakohe's decision. He is respected among our people." Elizabeth nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. She would need to prove herself here, just as she had in the smaller camp. But she was no longer the broken woman who had been sold like chattel in Willow Creek's dusty street. She had found strength she didn't know she possessed, and purpose in caring for 5 children who were gradually becoming hers in all but blood. "I'm not afraid of hard work or hard hearts," she told Orenda with quiet confidence. "Either can be softened with enough persistence." Orenda laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Yes, I think Nakohe has chosen better than some believe. Come, let us raise your home before the sun sets." Life in the larger encampment pulsed with a rhythm both foreign and increasingly familiar to Elizabeth. The days were structured around necessities, gathering water, preparing food, tending to children, but woven through these practical tasks were the threads of community and tradition that bound the Apache band together. Elizabeth learned quickly which women welcomed her assistance and which preferred to keep their distance. She discovered the unspoken hierarchies and alliances that existed among the families and gradually found her own place within them. Orenda proved a valuable friend, explaining customs that might otherwise have remained mysterious and introducing Elizabeth to women who were willing to share their knowledge. Not all were welcoming. One woman in particular, Taluta, whose brother had been killed by white settlers 2 summers past, made her displeasure known with cutting remarks in Apache that Elizabeth couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear from the tones and glances that accompanied them. "Pay her no mind," Orenda advised after one such encounter left Elizabeth flushed with embarrassment. "Her grief speaks, not her heart." Elizabeth nodded, watching Taluta stride away. "I represent everything she hates," she said softly. "I can't blame her for that." "You are not responsible for all white people's actions," Orenda replied firmly. "Just as I am not responsible for all Apache decisions. We are each ourselves." The wisdom in those words stayed with Elizabeth as she navigated her new world. She was neither fully accepted nor fully rejected. She existed in a liminal space of her own making, building bridges where she could and accepting boundaries where they were drawn. With the children, however, her position grew increasingly secure. Hewitt now called her Mother Elizabeth without prompting, a title that brought unexpected tears to her eyes the first time he used it. The twins competed for her attention rather than avoiding it. bringing her interesting stones or particularly successful hunts for her approval. Kimmy followed her like a shadow, learning to sew and cook and gather plants with a dedication that touched Elizabeth deeply. And Ayanna, proud, prickly Ayanna, had begun to seek Elizabeth out in quiet moments, often under the pretext of teaching her something, but increasingly just to talk. The girl's defenses lowered inch by inch, revealing a thoughtful, intelligent young woman caught between childhood and adult responsibilities. One evening, as they sat outside their dwelling sorting through wild berries they'd gathered, Ayanna suddenly asked, "Do you miss your old life with your own people?" Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things," she admitted. "Books. There were many books in the settlement. And music, not songs like yours, but played on instruments, pianos and fiddles." She smiled wistfully. "And sometimes I miss silly things, like ribbon for my hair or the taste of cinnamon in apple pie." Ayanna nodded solemnly, absorbing this information. "But not your family? Your parents who sold you?" The direct question caught Elizabeth off guard. She set aside the berries, buying time to order her thoughts. "My parents," she began, then paused. "They were not kind people. My father valued strength and success above all else, and had little patience for what he saw as weakness. My mother followed his lead in all things." "And your husband?" Ayanna pressed. "The one who sent you back because you couldn't have children?" Elizabeth felt the old shame rise up, but it was duller now, less cutting. "Thomas wanted sons to work his farm and carry on his name. When I couldn't provide them, he decided I had no value." Ayanna was quiet for a moment, her nimble fingers continuing to sort berries. Finally she said, "Among our people, a woman who cannot bear children is still honored. She becomes a teacher of young girls, or a healer, or helps with the children of others. No one would sell their daughter for such a thing." The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, loosened something tight in Elizabeth's chest. "Your people are wiser than mine in many ways," she said softly. Ayanna smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her solemn face. "Not in all ways. Your rabbit stew is better than any I've had before." Elizabeth laughed, touched by the unexpected compliment and the glimpse of normal girlhood beneath Ayanna's serious exterior. Their conversation was interrupted by Nakohe's approach. He had been away for several days, trading with a neighboring band, and his return brought a surge of relief Elizabeth hadn't anticipated. He looked tired but satisfied, his pack mules laden with goods exchanged for his fine tanned hides and baskets. "Father!" the twins shouted, racing to meet him. Kimmy and Hurit were close behind, leaving Elizabeth and Ayanna to follow at a more dignified pace. Nakohe embraced his children, accepting their excited chatter with patient attention. When he looked up and met Elizabeth's eyes over their heads, something warm and quiet passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of the stability she had maintained in his absence. That night, after the children were asleep, Nakohe invited Elizabeth to walk with him to the edge of the camp. They stood together under a vast field of stars, the air cool and sweet with the scent of sage. "The children look well," he said, his deep voice pitched low to avoid carrying in the night stillness. Ayanna smiles more now. "She's a remarkable girl," Elizabeth replied. "All your children are special, each in their own way." Nakohe nodded, pride evident in his posture. "They have accepted you into their hearts. This is good." "I've grown to love them," Elizabeth admitted, the words feeling both frightening and freeing to speak aloud. She had not dared examine too closely the depth of attachment she felt to these children who were not her own. Nakohe turned to look at her directly, his expression unreadable in the starlight. "And what of their father?" he asked quietly. "Have you found a place for him in your heart as well?" Elizabeth's breath caught. They had lived side by side for weeks now, sharing the care of his children, their lives entwined in 100 practical ways, but they had never spoken of feelings between them. She began, then found courage in the darkness. Yes, though I wasn't sure you wanted such a place. I did not expect to want it, he answered honestly. When I took you from that town, I thought only of my children's need for a mother. I did not consider that I might find... He paused, searching for the right word. Companionship, understanding. Is that what you found with me? Elizabeth asked. That and more, he said simply. You are strong, Elizabeth Harmon. Stronger than you know, and your heart is good. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. The gentle contact sent warmth cascading through her, a feeling so long absent she had nearly forgotten its existence. I would like to court you properly, he said. Not as a woman purchased, but as one chosen, if that is what you wish as well. Elizabeth leaned into his touch, her heart pounding with an emotion too complex to name. I would like that very much, she whispered. The moment stretched between them, fragile and perfect in its potential. Then Nakohe stepped back, his hand falling away, and Elizabeth felt both disappointment and relief. This new understanding between them was too precious to rush. Come, he said, it grows late, and tomorrow brings much work. They walked back to camp in companionable silence, separated by inches but connected by something deeper than physical proximity. Neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the edge of camp. Taluta, her face tight with anger and grief, her eyes following Elizabeth with undisguised hostility. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air. Elizabeth woke early, her mind still full of the previous night's conversation with Nakohe. A sense of possibility hummed within her, a feeling she had thought forever lost after Thomas's rejection. She emerged from the dwelling to find the camp in unusual activity. Men gathered near Kitchi's lodge, their expressions grave. Women spoke in hushed clusters, occasionally glancing toward the northern edge of the encampment. Elizabeth spotted Arenda and made her way to her friend's side. What's happening? She asked. Arenda's normally cheerful face was solemn. Riders were spotted before dawn. Soldiers, many of them, camped near the river crossing. Scouts say they carry papers and are asking about a white woman living among the Apache. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Soldiers? Looking for me? Arenda nodded grimly. A man from your settlement claims his daughter was stolen by Apache traders. He has convinced the fort commander to send men to search for you. My father, Elizabeth whispered, her mind racing. Why would he claim she was stolen when he had so willingly sold her? The answer came swiftly. Shame. Once the transaction became known beyond Willow Creek, he would have faced censure, perhaps even legal consequences. Easier to claim his daughter had been taken by force. The council meets now to decide what to do, Arenda continued. Kitchi has called for all warriors to prepare, but not to fight unless necessary. Elizabeth's thoughts turned immediately to the children. Where are they? Where is Nakohe? The children are with Liluye. Nakohe is with the council. Arenda touched Elizabeth's arm. What will you do, my friend? Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. I need to speak with the council. She found them gathered in a tight circle outside Kitchi's lodge, the elder men of the band, Nakohe among them, their faces grave as they spoke in rapid Apache. When she approached, conversation ceased, and all eyes turned to her. I must speak, she said, addressing Kitchi directly. If soldiers seek me, I should have a voice in what happens next. The old chief studied her, then nodded once. Speak, daughter of the auburn hair. Elizabeth took a deep breath. These men come because of lies my father has told. He claims I was stolen, but you all know the truth. He sold me himself, without care for my wishes or welfare. She looked around the circle, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "I will not hide from these soldiers. I will tell them the truth." A murmur ran through the group. Nakohe stepped forward, his expression troubled. "It may not be so simple, Elizabeth. These men carry the authority of the government. They may not believe a woman over a man, and they will see only that you are white, living among Apache." "Then what would you have me do?" she asked. "Run, hide, allow your people to fight and die for a lie?" "Not for a lie," Nakohe countered. "For one of our own." The simple statement, claiming her as one of them, nearly undid her composure. Elizabeth blinked back unexpected tears. Kichi raised a hand for silence. "The woman speaks with courage," he said, "but my nephew speaks with wisdom. The bluecoats do not see with clear eyes when it comes to our people. They may take you by force, believing they rescue you. Or they may punish the band for what they see as kidnapping," another elder added. Elizabeth considered this, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. Her decisions now would affect not just herself, but the entire community that had taken her in. "What if I go to them?" she suggested. "Alone, of my own free will. I could explain the truth before they reach the camp." Nakohe's face darkened. "Too dangerous. They could simply take you." "They could come and take me anyway," Elizabeth pointed out. "At least this way, I choose the ground for our meeting." The council debated her suggestion, voices rising and falling in the Apache tongue. Elizabeth waited, patient but determined. Finally, Kichi spoke again. "It is decided. You will meet these soldiers, but not alone. Nakohe and 2 others will accompany you. You will speak your truth, and we will see if white ears can hear it." Elizabeth nodded, relief and apprehension mingling in her chest. "Thank you." As the council dispersed, Nakohe pulled her aside, his eyes troubled. "Are you certain of this path, Elizabeth? Once taken, it cannot be untaken." "I'm certain," she replied, drawing strength from his concern. "I won't live in hiding, Nakohe, and I won't have blood spilled over a lie." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we will face this together." Elizabeth returned to their dwelling to find the children huddled inside, their faces solemn. Ayana stood by the entrance, a knife concealed in the folds of her dress. She straightened when she saw Elizabeth. "Are the soldiers coming to take you away?" Hewitt asked, his small face pinched with worry. Elizabeth knelt before them. "Some men are coming who have been told untrue things," she explained gently. "I'm going to meet them and tell them the truth, that I am here because I choose to be here, with all of you." "What if they don't believe you?" Elan demanded. "What if they take you anyway?" Takoda echoed, his hand reaching for his twins. Elizabeth fought to keep her voice steady. "That's why your father and others are coming with me, to make sure everything is fair." "I should come too," Ayana declared, her chin lifting in that stubborn way Elizabeth had come to recognize. "I can tell them how you take care of us." Elizabeth's heart swelled with love for this fierce girl. "That's very brave, Ayana, but I need you here, keeping your brothers and sisters safe. Can you do that for me?" After a moment of obvious internal struggle, Ayana nodded. "I will protect them." Elizabeth embraced each child, holding them a moment longer than usual, breathing in their familiar scents, committing to memory the feel of their small bodies against hers. If things went badly, this might be a farewell. "I will return," she promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. Outside, as she prepared to leave with Nakohe and the 2 warriors chosen to accompany them, strong, silent men named Hinto and Maka, Elizabeth noticed a disturbance near the edge of camp. Taluta stood arguing with Arenda, their voices rising. "What happens there?" Elizabeth asked. Nakohe frowned. "Trouble. Wait here." He strode toward the women, interrupting what appeared to be an increasingly heated exchange. Elizabeth couldn't hear their words, but she saw Taluta gesture angrily in her direction, then point northward toward where the soldiers were camped. Orenda's face was flushed with anger, while Nakohe's expression grew increasingly stern. After a brief but intense conversation, Nakohe returned, his jaw tight. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth asked. "Taluta sent her young nephew to the soldiers' camp last night," he explained grimly. "He told them where to find you, claimed you were being held against your will." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. "She truly hates me that much." "Her hatred is not for you alone, but for all your people," Nakohe said. "She lost much to white men's violence." "What does this mean for our plan?" "It means we must hurry. The soldiers will not wait for us to come to them now." As if summoning his words into reality, a shout went up from the northern sentry. Riders approached. A dozen blue-uniformed men on horseback, led by an officer with a trim mustache and ramrod posture. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Warriors took up defensive positions, while women gathered children and retreated to dwellings. Elizabeth stood her ground as Nakohe conferred quickly with Hinto and Mahka, their expressions grim. "Stay behind me," Nakohe instructed, returning to her side. "Let me speak first." Elizabeth nodded, her mouth dry with fear, not for herself, but for these people who had become her family. If blood was spilled today, it would be on her hands. The soldiers reined in at the edge of the camp, their hands resting near their weapons. The officer raised his hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or warning. "I am Lieutenant James Wilson, United States Army," he called out. "I am looking for a white woman named Elizabeth Harmon, reportedly held captive here." Nakohe stepped forward, his posture proud but non-threatening. "I am Nakohe of the Jicarilla Apache. There is no captive here, only free people." Lieutenant Wilson's eyes narrowed, scanning the camp until they found Elizabeth. "Are you Elizabeth Harmon?" he called. Elizabeth stepped forward, despite Nakohe's attempt to keep her behind him. "I am," she replied, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. The officer's face showed relief. "Miss Harmon, your father has reported your abduction by Apache traders. We're here to escort you safely home." "I was not abducted, Lieutenant," Elizabeth stated firmly. "I am here of my own free will." A murmur ran through the soldiers. The lieutenant frowned. "Miss Harmon, if you're being coerced—" "I am not," Elizabeth interrupted. "My father sold me to Nakohe in Willow Creek's main street, witnessed by half the town, including Reverend Miller. He's lying to save his own reputation." Lieutenant Wilson dismounted, handing his reins to a subordinate. "May I speak with you privately, Miss Harmon? Away from—" He gestured vaguely at Nakohe and the others. Elizabeth glanced at Nakohe, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "You may speak with me here," she countered. "I have nothing to hide from these people. They are my family now." The lieutenant approached cautiously, stopping several paces away. He lowered his voice. "Miss Harmon, whatever arrangement was made, whatever circumstances led to your current situation, we can rectify it. You don't have to remain here." "You don't understand, Lieutenant," Elizabeth said quietly. "I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I choose to be." He studied her face, looking for signs of duress or madness. "Your father claims you were sold against your will, that you suffered a mental break after your husband abandoned you." Anger flashed through Elizabeth, hot and clarifying. "My father claims many things, Lieutenant, few of them true. As for my husband, he discarded me when I proved barren. Here," she gestured around her, "I have found purpose caring for 5 children who needed a mother. I have found community, respect." The lieutenant's expression remained skeptical. "Community among savages? These people have shown me more humanity than I ever received in Willow Creek," Elizabeth replied, her voice steady despite her rising emotion. "They don't see me as damaged or worthless because I cannot bear children. Be that as it may, Miss Harmon, I have orders to rescue a captive woman, Elizabeth finished for him. But as you can see, I am not captive. Lieutenant Wilson frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. His orders hadn't prepared him for a white woman who preferred life among the Apache. If I could ask you to consider, he began, but was interrupted by a commotion from the edge of camp. A lone rider approached at a gallop, a civilian, not a soldier. As he drew closer, Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. She would recognize that stocky figure anywhere. Her father. John Harmon reined his horse to a stop beside the lieutenant, his face red with exertion and anger. His eyes found Elizabeth, narrowing dangerously. There she is, now he bellowed. My poor, confused daughter. What have these savages done to you, girl? Elizabeth stood frozen, the voice that had commanded her entire childhood striking her momentarily mute. She felt Nakohe step closer, his solid presence at her back, giving her courage. Nothing compared to what you did, father, she said finally, her voice low but clear. You sold me like cattle when I no longer served your purpose. John Harmon's face darkened further. Nonsense. Lieutenant, can't you see she's been corrupted by these heathens? My daughter would never speak to her father this way. Your daughter, Elizabeth repeated, finding strength in the words, is a woman grown who makes her own choices now. And I choose to stay here with the family who values me. Family? John sputtered. These Indians? Have you lost your mind completely, girl? I've found my mind, Elizabeth corrected, and my heart. She reached back without looking, and Nakohe's hand met hers, their fingers intertwining in silent solidarity. John Harmon's face contorted with rage at the sight of his daughter's hand clasped in Nakohe's. Take your filthy hands off my child, he shouted, reaching for the pistol at his belt. Lieutenant Wilson moved quickly, grasping Harmon's arm. Control yourself, sir, he ordered. This is a military operation, not a personal vendetta. She's been bewitched, Harmon sputtered, still straining against the officer's grip. Can't you see it? No white woman in her right mind would choose this savage life. Elizabeth felt Nakohe tense beside her, but his voice remained calm when he spoke. The only savagery here comes from a man who would sell his daughter, then claim she was stolen. Lieutenant Wilson's gaze sharpened, moving between Elizabeth and her father with new assessment. Is this true, Mr. Harmon? Did you sell your daughter? Preposterous, Harmon blustered, but his eyes shifted away, unable to meet the officer's direct gaze. She was despondent after her husband returned her, not in her right mind. These Indians took advantage of her condition. There were 20 witnesses in Willow Creek that day, Elizabeth said evenly, including Reverend Miller. Ask any of them what they saw. A young soldier stepped forward hesitantly. Lieutenant, sir, I'm from Willow Creek. My ma was there that day. Said it was the most shameful thing she'd ever seen, a father selling his own flesh and blood. John Harmon's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. You insolent. That will do, Mr. Harmon. Lieutenant Wilson cut him off sharply. He turned to Elizabeth, his expression thoughtful. Miss Harmon, regardless of how you came to be here, as a white woman, you have the right to return to civilization under military escort. And if I decline that right? Elizabeth asked. The lieutenant frowned. That would be unusual. My life is unusual, Lieutenant, Elizabeth replied with a hint of a smile, but it is mine to choose. From behind her came a small voice. Mother Elizabeth. Elizabeth turned to see Hewitt running toward her, having escaped Ayana's watchful eye. Before she could stop him, he threw himself against her skirts, clinging tightly. Don't go, he pleaded, his small face upturned and tear-streaked. Elizabeth knelt, gathering the child close. Hush, little one, she soothed, smoothing his dark hair. I'm not going anywhere. One by one, the other children emerged from the dwelling. First Kimmy, then the twins, and finally Ayana, her expression fierce and protective. They formed a tight cluster around Elizabeth and Nakohe, a family united against the threat of separation. The sight clearly disconcerted the lieutenant. This was not the scene of captivity or abuse he had been led to expect. "Mother?" John Harmon's voice cracked with disbelief. "These Indian brats call you mother?" Elizabeth stood, keeping Hurit's hand in hers. "Yes, father. I am their mother in all ways that matter, the ways that count." She lifted her chin. "I may be barren in body, but not in heart." Her father recoiled as if struck. "You shame your family, your race, living like this. Your poor mother is beside herself with grief." "My mother stood silent while you sold me," Elizabeth countered. "She has forfeited any right to grief." Lieutenant Wilson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. "It seems clear, Mr. Harmon, that your daughter is not being held against her will. My orders were specifically to rescue a captive woman." He turned to address his men. "We're withdrawing." "You can't leave her here," John Harmon protested. "It's unnatural, against God's law." "It's not for me to judge what's natural or godly, sir," the lieutenant replied stiffly. "Only to determine if a crime has been committed against a white citizen. And it appears the only crime here was committed by you in selling your daughter." He paused, his expression hardening. "A crime which, I might add, could be prosecuted should Miss Harmon wish to press charges." Elizabeth shook her head. "I want nothing from him. Not justice, not apology, nothing. I only wish to be left in peace with my family." The lieutenant nodded, accepting her decision. "Very well." He turned to Nakohe. "You understand that I must report this situation to my superiors." "I understand," Nakohe replied. "Tell them Elizabeth Harmon lives here by choice and under my protection." "And the protection of the entire band," Kichi added, stepping forward to stand beside his nephew. "Any who seek to take her will face the consequences." Lieutenant Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly at the implied threat, but he merely nodded. "Good day, Miss Harmon. I hope your choice brings you happiness." As the soldiers prepared to depart, John Harmon made one last desperate appeal. "Elizabeth, for the love of God, come to your senses. Think of your immortal soul." Elizabeth met her father's eyes directly, no longer afraid of his anger or judgment. "My soul is at peace, Father. Perhaps you should worry about your own." With that, she turned her back on him, symbolically closing the door on her past. She knelt again among the children, drawing them close as the soldiers rode away, her father's curses fading into the distance. The camp remained tense until the riders disappeared over the horizon. Only then did the collective breath they'd been holding release in a rush of relief. Women emerged from dwellings, warriors relaxed their vigilance, and a murmur of conversation replaced the taut silence. "You were very brave," Nakohe said quietly, his hand coming to rest on Elizabeth's shoulder. "Not brave," she demurred, "just certain." Kichi approached, his aged face solemn but his eyes warm. "Today you have proven yourself twice over, Elizabeth of the auburn hair. First in your loyalty to our people, and second in your courage against those who would take you from us." Elizabeth bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, honored one." The old chief smiled. "From this day forward, you are no longer a guest among us, but one of us. We will hold a ceremony tonight to give you your Apache name." A ripple of surprise and approval moved through the gathering crowd. To be given an Apache name was no small thing. It was formal recognition of belonging. As the excitement of the pronouncement spread, Elizabeth felt a tug at her skirt. She looked down to find Kimmy, her small face solemn. "Does this mean you will stay forever?" the girl asked. Elizabeth knelt to meet her eyes. "Yes, little one, forever." Kimmy's face broke into a radiant smile, and she threw her arms around Elizabeth's neck. As the day progressed toward evening, Preparations for the naming ceremony occupied the camp. Elizabeth was taken by Arenda and several other women to a secluded spot by the stream, where they helped her bathe and dress in a beautifully decorated buckskin dress that had been secretly prepared for this occasion. "How long have you been making this?" Elizabeth asked, touching the intricate beadwork with wonder. "Since the day you stood up to Ayana, and she didn't kill you," Arenda replied with a laugh. "We knew then you might stay." As they worked, Elizabeth noticed Taluta hovering at the edge of the group, her expression troubled. When the other women moved away to gather flowers for Elizabeth's hair, Taluta approached hesitantly. "I was wrong," she said simply, her voice low but clear. "I thought you were like the others, the white men who killed my brother. I wanted you gone." Elizabeth nodded, acknowledging the admission without interrupting. "But today," Taluta continued, "you chose us over your own blood. You stood with Nakohe against the bluecoats who could have taken you back to comfort and ease." "There is no comfort in living a lie," Elizabeth replied gently, "and no ease in being valued only for what your body can or cannot produce." Taluta's eyes widened slightly at these words. After a moment, she nodded. "Perhaps we understand each other better than I thought. It wasn't quite forgiveness or friendship, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of hostility that had stood between them." Elizabeth offered a small smile, which Taluta acknowledged with a solemn nod before withdrawing. The naming ceremony began at dusk, with the entire band gathered around a central fire. Kitchi presided, his white hair gleaming in the firelight, his voice carrying with surprising strength as he recounted the story of Elizabeth's arrival and her choice to remain with them. Nakohe stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor, as she faced the community that was now truly becoming hers. The children sat nearby, their faces shining with pride. "In our way," Kitchi explained, "a name is not merely what you are called, but who you are. It speaks of your spirit, your place in the world, your gifts." He gestured for Elizabeth to step forward into the circle of light. "You came to us without choice," he said, his voice carrying to all present. "Sold like a possession, valued only for what your body could not do. Yet you found strength to build a new life, to love children not born of your body, to stand against your own people for your chosen family." He dipped his fingers in a bowl of red ochre and drew a line down Elizabeth's forehead and nose, then across her cheekbones. "From this day forward, you will be known among us as Enola, she who walks alone. Not because you are without family," he explained, seeing her momentary confusion, "but because you had the courage to leave the path set for you and find your own way." The autumn days grew shorter, the nights crisper. Leaves turned gold and crimson before surrendering to the wind. Elizabeth, now Enola to her Apache family, embraced the rhythms of a life she could once scarcely have imagined. Her naming ceremony had marked a turning point. No longer an outsider struggling to find her place, she moved through the camp with the quiet confidence of belonging. The women who had once watched her with suspicion now included her in their circles, sharing stories and skills passed down through generations. Even Taluta, though never effusive, had come to treat her with a grudging respect that gradually warmed to something like friendship. The children flourished under her care. Urit, no longer shadowing his siblings, now ran fearlessly through the camp, secure in the knowledge that Mother Enola would always be there when he returned. Kimi revealed a talent for beadwork, her small fingers creating patterns of surprising complexity under Elizabeth's encouraging eye. The twins, still competitive, had become protective of her, proudly telling anyone who would listen how she could skin a rabbit faster than any other woman in camp. And Ayana, proud, fierce Ayana, had blossomed like a desert flower after rain. The girl still carried responsibilities beyond her years, but she no longer bore them alone. She and Elizabeth worked side by side, their hands moving in synchronized harmony as they prepared hides or gathered plants, their conversations ranging from practical matters to the girl's hopes for the future. "Do you think I could be a healer like Grandmother Lilui?" Ayana asked one afternoon as they sorted herbs. Elizabeth smiled. "I think you can be anything you set your heart on, Ayana. You have both intelligence and compassion, the two essential qualities of a good healer." The girl ducked her head, but not before Elizabeth caught her pleased smile. These small moments of connection, once so hard-won, now came easily between them. Only with Nakohe did Elizabeth still feel a certain hesitancy. Since the day she had faced down her father, something had shifted between them, a deepening of respect, a heightening of awareness. His eyes followed her movements around the camp, her pulse quickened whenever their hands accidentally brushed. Yet neither had taken the step to transform their practical partnership into something more intimate until the night of the first snow. It came earlier than expected, a gentle dusting that transformed the encampment into something magical. The children had rushed outside at first light, laughing as they caught flakes on their tongues and traced patterns in the thin white blanket covering the ground. Elizabeth stood watching them, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. She didn't hear Nakohe approach until he spoke. "You smile more now," he observed, coming to stand beside her. "It suits you." Elizabeth turned to him, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I have reasons to smile." He nodded, his dark eyes warm as they moved from her face to the playing children and back again. "As do I." Something in his tone made her heart skip. They stood in companionable silence, watching as Hurit attempted to gather enough snow to form a small ball, his face screwed up in concentration. "Inola," Nakohe said finally, using her Apache name with a gentleness that made it sound like a caress. "I would speak with you about our future." Elizabeth felt a flutter of anticipation. "I'm listening." "When I found you in that settlement, I sought only a mother for my children," he began, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "I did not expect to find a partner for myself as well." He turned to face her fully. "Among our people, a man may take a wife in different ways. Sometimes it is arranged by families. Sometimes he might capture a woman from another tribe." His lips curved slightly. "And sometimes he simply asks the woman he respects above all others to join her life with his." Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. "Is that what you're doing now, asking?" "Yes," he said simply. "I ask you, Enola, to be my wife. Not in name only as you have been these past months, but in truth. Not because you were purchased, but because you are chosen." Emotions swelled in Elizabeth's chest, too big to be contained. "I have been chosen so rarely in my life," she whispered, "always discarded when I failed to fulfill expectations." Nakohe reached out, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "You have exceeded all expectations, Enola. You have brought healing to my children, respect to my household, and joy to my heart." Elizabeth leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Then yes, Nakohe, I choose you as well." His smile, rare and radiant, transformed his solemn face. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, then pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. They were married as the first snows deepened, in a ceremony that blended Apache tradition with elements of Elizabeth's former faith. She wore the beaded dress from her naming ceremony, with a crown of winter berries woven into her auburn hair. Nakohe wore his finest garments, his chest adorned with a breastplate of polished bone and turquoise. Kichi presided, his weathered hands binding theirs together with a braided cord of horsehair and sinew. The children stood as witnesses, their faces shining with joy. Even Ayana, who had whispered her blessing to Elizabeth that morning while helping her prepare. "You have made us whole again," the girl had said simply, before quickly busying herself with arranging Elizabeth's hair, embarrassed by her own emotion. Now, as the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Elizabeth looked around at the faces of those who had become her family, not by blood, but by choice, by acceptance, by love freely given and received. She thought of the woman she had been in Willow Creek, head bowed under the weight of shame, valued only for what her body could not do. Here, she was Enola, she who walks alone, not because she was solitary, but because she had found the courage to forge her own path. Here, her barrenness was not a curse, but simply one aspect of a woman valued for her strength, her skills, her capacity for love. "You are far away," Nakohe murmured, drawing her back to the present as they sat side by side, accepting congratulations from the band. "Just reflecting on the journey that brought me here," she replied, squeezing his hand. His eyes held understanding. "It is good to remember where we have been, but better to look forward to where we are going." And where they were going, Elizabeth knew, was into a future built on mutual respect and deepening love. A love that encompassed not just the two of them, but the 5 children who had claimed her heart long before she became their mother, in truth. Spring came early that year, painting the plains in vibrant greens and golds after the long white sleep of winter. Elizabeth stood at the entrance of their dwelling, watching as life renewed itself across the encampment. Women chatted as they worked, children played in the warm sunshine, men prepared for the season's first hunt. Beside her, Nakohe adjusted the cradle board he was crafting, his skilled hands carving intricate protective symbols into the wood. "Do you think she'll like it?" he asked, an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty in his voice. Elizabeth smiled, placing her hand over his. "She'll love it because her father made it with love." They both turned at the sound of approaching footsteps. Orenda appeared, her face flushed with excitement, cradling a small bundle wrapped in the softest deerskin. "She's perfect," Orenda announced, carefully transferring the bundle to Elizabeth's waiting arms. "The strongest little girl I've delivered in many seasons." Elizabeth drew back the wrapping to gaze at the tiny face nestled within, copper-skinned like her father, but with a dusting of auburn fuzz on her perfect head. The infant yawned, revealing pink gums and a tongue that curled like a rosebud. "Little Achak," Elizabeth whispered, using the name they had chosen, meaning spirit in the Apache tongue. "Welcome to our family." Nakohe stood close, his arm around Elizabeth's shoulders as he gazed down at his new daughter. "A miracle," he murmured. "Yes," Elizabeth agreed, though they both knew she didn't refer to the unexpected pregnancy that had stunned them all 5 moons ago. The true miracle was not that her supposedly barren body had conceived, but that she had found a place where such a gift was appreciated, but not required for her to be valued. The sound of running feet announced the arrival of the older children, returning from their morning chores to meet their new sister. They clustered around, faces alight with wonder and excitement. "She's so small," Hewitt exclaimed, now a sturdy 6-year-old with his father's serious eyes. "She's beautiful," Kimmy breathed, reaching out one finger to touch the baby's cheek. The twins peered at their sister with identical expressions of protective pride. "We'll teach her to hunt when she's bigger," Elan declared. "And to ride," Takoda added. Ayana, now 14 and growing into a young woman of remarkable grace, stood slightly apart, her expression thoughtful. Elizabeth beckoned her closer. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked. Ayana's eyes widened. "May I?" "Of course. You're her big sister." With careful movements, Ayana took the infant in her arms, cradling her with natural skill. The baby's tiny hand escaped the wrapping and grasped Ayana's finger with surprising strength. "She knows you," Elizabeth said softly, Ayana looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I will teach her everything," she promised. "All the songs my mother taught me, all the stories of our people. And I will help you remember them," Elizabeth promised in return. As she stood surrounded by her family, the husband who had seen her worth when others did not, the children who had opened their hearts to her, and now this unexpected new life they had created together, Elizabeth felt a sense of completion that transcended words. From abandoned wife to purchased woman to beloved Enola, her journey had been one of loss and discovery, of endings and beginnings. She had learned that family was not defined by blood, but by belonging, that motherhood came in many forms, and that what others deemed a curse could become a blessing in disguise. And most importantly, she had discovered that a woman's value lay not in what her body could produce, but in the love her heart could hold. A love that grew ever more abundant with each passing season, like wildflowers spreading across the prairie after rain, transforming what once seemed barren into something beautiful beyond measure.